He was the town's quiet protector, until one lie turned him into its public enemy. A white woman points. A little girl lies injured, and a black man's name burns before the truth ever has a chance. But when a hidden dashcam flickers to life, the story they thought they knew starts to unravel. Now the question isn't did he do it, it's why were they so sure he did. Big Shaq doesn't speak for revenge. He stands for truth, and the truth ain't always loud, but it never dies. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel, and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. He was the kind of man people noticed, even when he was doing nothing. Standing at 7'1", with hands large enough to palm a steering wheel like it was a basketball, Big Shaq didn't move through the world unnoticed. But attention was never what he sought. He'd learned early on that visibility wasn't the same as being seen. In a world that often judged before listening, he became a master of silence, of watching, of showing love through action, instead of words. Shaquille O'Neal wasn't just a name people knew from highlight reels or sports networks. In this small southern town where he'd chosen to settle, away from the spotlight, away from the noise, he was simply known as Shaq. Not the athlete, not the millionaire, not the global brand, just Shaq, the guy who left a folded 100 under the register at the corner store for struggling families to use when they came in after school hours. The man who paid for full Thanksgiving meals and had them delivered with no names attached. The one who showed up at every high school basketball game, not to coach, not to speak, just to clap loud and smile wide when a kid made a free throw. People saw the size first. Always the size. They noticed the gold rings, the deep voice, the celebrity aura that seemed to follow him no matter how much he tried to shrink from it. But they didn't always notice the way he leaned down to tie a child's shoe in a grocery aisle. They didn't know he spent hours at the local animal shelter, not just donating but sitting on the concrete floors with abandoned dogs who reminded him of his own youth, waiting to be wanted. He had a routine, gentle and predictable, like the rhythm of a hymn. Mornings started with a walk around the block, earbuds in, playing slow jazz. A stop at the old gas station run by Mr. Reynolds, a veteran with a stiff back and no family left. Shaq always asked how his pain was doing, always left with a bottle of water, and an extra $5 bill slipped under the register when Mr. Reynolds wasn't looking. By late afternoon he was at the rec center. Never announced, never flashy, just there helping spot kids on the bench press, fixing the AC filter when it sputtered, slipping $20 bills into the pockets of single mothers who came in, looking tired and left a little lighter. He didn't do it for praise. In fact, he almost seemed uncomfortable when people tried to thank him. He'd wave them off with a simple, just trying to keep it moving. And that would be it. His kindness didn't come with conditions or cameras. It came from something deeper, something older, maybe something broken that he had patched up with purpose. Because the truth no one really said out loud, but everyone kind of knew, was that Shaq had seen things. He carried the quiet weight of memories that didn't make it to headlines. The nights he'd been pulled over for looking like someone, in a town that couldn't forget his skin even when they remembered his name. The deals he'd lost quietly, because a boardroom full of suits didn't want a gentle giant speaking on systemic injustice. The time someone spray-painted "Go back to where you came from" on the wall outside his gym. That wall was painted over the next morning, but the crack in it never quite went away. Still, he smiled. He listened. He showed up. Because Shaq believed in people. Or maybe he believed in their potential to be better, even if they weren't yet. Lucille, his mother, still sharp and full of fire, used to tell him, "People will measure you by what they fear, not what they know. Make sure what they fear ain't what's true." And so he worked, quietly, consistently, building a reputation not on fame but on presence. The kind that shows up at 2 a.m. when a neighbor's car won't start. The kind that remembers birthdays. The kind that doesn't ask questions when someone just needs a place to sit and cry. There were moments when people questioned it, when they wondered if it was all some long PR game. But those who lived here knew better. Like Janice from the bakery, who said she found a month's rent in an envelope one winter after the pipes burst in her house. No note. Just a doodle of a smiley face in giant marker. Or Leroy from the youth program, who said Shaq came by every December to leave brand new shoes for the kids who played ball barefoot in the cold. He didn't post about it, didn't brag. He just moved through his days, like a quiet storm of goods, slow, steady, impossible to ignore once you'd felt it. The town had changed because of him, though few would admit it. Old biases softened, conversations started, Black kids started walking a little taller. White kids started listening a little more. Racism didn't disappear, but it lost some of its boldness. Because when Shaq stood beside you, ignorance had a harder time pretending it was courage. And yet underneath all that warmth was a man who knew pain. Not just personal, but ancestral. A man who carried stories in his bones, passed down from generations, who were not allowed to speak them. A man who knew that kindness was not weakness, and silence was not surrender. He had a way of walking into a room, and making it feel safer. Not because he said anything, but because people knew he'd never let it turn ugly. Kids called him Uncle Shaq. Parents trusted him. Strangers smiled before realizing why. But even gentle giants have thresholds. Even the kindest hearts know limits. And in a world where assumptions spread faster than facts, even a man like Shaq could find himself on the edge of something darker. He didn't know it yet, but the quiet life he'd built, the respect he'd earned, the good he'd done, was about to be tested by a lie so sharp, so deliberate, it could rip through everything he'd protected. The day that test began started just like any other. A sunny sky, a coffee run, a neighborhood walk. No one expected what came next. Not even the man who had built his life on grace. But sometimes the world doesn't care how gentle you are, only how easy you are to blame. It started like one of those mornings you wish you could bottle up forever. The kind of day that arrives with a promise. Warm sun slipping through oak branches. The town breathing easy after 3 days of rain. Shaq stepped out of his modest ranch-style home, with a styrofoam coffee cup in hand, wearing a plain gray hoodie, and slides that slapped against the sidewalk with every heavy-footed step. The air smelled like grass clippings and fresh pastry from the bakery down on Edison. Peace wasn't loud here, it hummed softly beneath the surface. That morning it felt louder than usual. He had his usual stops. First, the gas station to check on Mr. Reynolds, then a slow walk toward the church steps, where Miss Georgia, the elderly widow of a veteran, often sat feeding pigeons. But today she wasn't there. Instead, he spotted her across the street near the crosswalk, gripping a shopping bag with trembling hands and struggling to balance herself on a crooked cane. Shaq quickened his pace and gently tapped her shoulder, asking if she needed help. Her smile was weathered but warm, her gratitude quiet and genuine. He wrapped one large hand around her tiny elbow and helped her step by step across the road, shielding her from the breeze. A moment so ordinary, it almost faded as quickly as it came. Just another small kindness, lost in a day full of them. But as he reached the other side, something pierced the serenity. A screech of tires, then a sound that didn't belong. A thud. Not metal on metal. Something worse. A sickening, blunt collision that forced every head on the block to turn. Down the street, near the intersection of Clement and Bayview, people were starting to gather. Panic flared like wildfire. Someone screaming, others running toward a scene. Shaq couldn't yet see clearly. He stepped into the street and squinted. A child's bicycle lay mangled by the sidewalk. A pair of pink shoes lay tossed near a fire hydrant. A woman was sobbing, cradling what looked like a small body, though the swarm of people around her made it hard to tell. Shaq didn't hesitate. He moved quickly, but the moment he turned the corner, a voice sliced through the crowd. Sharp, loud, shaking with just enough conviction to stop time. "That's the car. That's his car." The words didn't make sense. At first he thought maybe someone else had arrived. Maybe the person responsible had returned, or the car had circled back. But then more voices joined in, murmurs at first, then louder, more pointed. Fingers began to extend like arrows, accusing, frantic. Shaq's gaze followed theirs, down the street, past the open lot, to where his own black Escalade sat parked along the curb. Not running, not damaged, just there. The same spot he left it in 15 minutes ago when he went on his walk. But none of that mattered now. "That's the one I saw," another voice cried out. "That's the SUV." Shaq stood frozen, not in fear but in confusion. A kind of heavy disbelief that slows time down and makes everything feel out of place. His car had been off, locked, untouched, yet here he was, standing 50 yards away, being named the driver in a hit and run. He glanced down the street. People had started filming. Someone was talking into a phone, likely describing him. A few bystanders backed away slowly, pulling their children closer, as if something about him had suddenly changed. A woman stepped forward through the crowd. Mid-40s. Blonde bobbed hair. white linen dress with a navy blue sash. Her hands shook with what looked like fury, or maybe performance. Her voice was trembling, but oddly focused, like someone who had practiced these kinds of moments. I saw him. He was driving that black SUV. He hit her and kept going. I saw it with my own eyes. Shaq didn't know her. He had never seen her in town before. And yet she spoke with the certainty of someone who had decided he was guilty before asking a single question. The way she pointed, the way her voice cracked in just the right spots. It wasn't panic. It was precision. He took a slow step back, unsure what to say, what to do. He looked around, searching for a familiar face, someone who knew him, someone who'd step forward and say, "Wait. Shaq's been walking the block this whole time. That can't be right." But no one spoke. It happened fast after that. Police sirens rolled in from opposite ends of the street. Blue and red lights washed over brick walls and window panes. The crowd split like a wave. The woman in linen kept yelling. The child on the ground, a girl, maybe 6, was being lifted gently onto a stretcher. An officer approached Shaq, hand on holster, but not drawn. The tone was careful. "Sir, we need to ask you a few questions." Neutral on the surface but weighted beneath. Shaq nodded slowly. He was calm, not because he didn't feel the weight of it all, but because he'd been in rooms like this before, not exactly like this, but close enough. He handed over his keys, answered every question with measured clarity, explained his morning, where he'd walked, who he'd seen, and what time he left the house. The officers asked for his phone. He gave it. They checked timestamps, walked the route he mentioned. But the tension didn't leave the air. Not even when the car showed no signs of recent activity. Not even when a local teen confirmed seeing Shaq at the gas station minutes before the incident. Doubt had already taken root. Because once someone says, "That's the guy," it's hard for people to unhear it. Harder still when the man being pointed at is black, tall, and historically powerful. In moments like these, power turns to threat, familiarity turns to suspicion, and the gentle giant they once trusted suddenly becomes a headline. Shaq didn't cry. He didn't shout. But inside something shifted. A stillness replaced the warmth that had defined his day. The kind of stillness that settles in when you realize the ground beneath your feet isn't as solid as you thought. That all it takes is one lie, one assumption, and everything you've built can be questioned. He returned home later that day, cleared of any immediate wrongdoing, but with a warning to remain available for follow-up. Delilah Moorcroft, the woman in linen, had filed a statement. She remained firm in her claim. Shaq sat alone on his porch. As dusk fell, the empty coffee cup from the morning still resting on the table beside him. He didn't touch it. He just stared at the horizon, replaying every moment, every word, trying to figure out how a sunny day could turn so suddenly, so completely. And in the distance, the whispers had already started. The kind that don't need facts to flourish. The kind that live in the spaces between truth and perception. Delilah Moorcroft wasn't just known in town. She was established. Her name carried weight, not because of legacy, but because of placement. She'd positioned herself at the intersection of charity, influence, and control. President of the local preservation committee, vice chair of the education board, donor to every fundraiser that needed a face for the brochures. She was the kind of woman who knew how to make people feel like they owed her something, even when she... On the morning of the hit and run, Delilah appeared on the scene like she'd rehearsed it. Wrapped in a crisp white linen dress, hair pinned in deliberate disorder, her voice quivering just enough to seem fragile but not fractured. She stood with one hand pressed to her chest, the other shaking as she pointed down the street. "I saw it," she whispered loudly enough for the reporters to hear. "He was driving. He hit my niece. And he just kept going." No one questioned the timeline. No one asked where she had been before the incident, or how far she'd been standing. They didn't need to. Her words slid into the town's ears like gospel, mostly because they fit. A black man, a big SUV, a child struck in broad daylight, and a well-known white woman willing to step forward, already painted in the colors of heartbreak and bravery. The news ran the story within hours. Headlines read like accusations, not facts. Local woman identifies Shaquille O'Neal in hit-and-run incident. The words "alleged" and "under investigation" were buried in the fine print, tucked beneath photos of Delilah standing stoically beside her sobbing niece's hospital bed. The cameras didn't blink when she wiped away tears that never smudged her mascara. Delilah had always known how to hold a room. At town meetings, Her voice was the one they deferred to. Her opinions delivered like facts. She never raised her tone, but everyone heard her. So when she said, "It was him," they didn't push back, because that would mean doubting her. And in a town where money talked and history leaned one way, doubting her came with a cost. She spoke on the news with practiced grief. Her hands folded delicately, as she told the story again and again. "It all happened so fast," she said, pausing just enough to draw in a sob. "But I remember the car, that deep black Escalade, and the driver, yes. I saw him. Shaquille O'Neal. I recognized him right away." No one asked why she'd never mentioned being close to the scene until after the cameras arrived. No one pointed out that the Escalade had no damage, or that Shaq had multiple alibis. Instead, attention turned to Delilah, the grieving aunt, the community leader, the tragic figure caught in a senseless event. She became the centerpiece of the story, while Shaq became its silhouette, large, looming, suspicious. Behind the scenes, Delilah's influence began to work. Quiet calls to media outlets, gentle nudges to reporters about her family's donations to their platforms, a subtle warning to the school superintendent about upcoming budget cuts if public support shifted in the wrong direction. These weren't threats, not overt ones. But in towns like these, power rarely shouted. At a candlelight vigil held 2 days later, Delilah stood at the podium, flanked by the mayor and 2 local pastors. Her speech was brief, but potent. "We are not here to point fingers," she said, eyes wet but voice firm. "We are here to demand truth, justice, accountability." She didn't name Shaq directly. She didn't have to. The crowd filled in the blank. And through all this, the question no one asked was the one that mattered most. How could she be so sure? The SUV's windows were tinted. The sun was in her eyes. Based on the time of day, she was, according to her own timeline, across the intersection, a good 50 feet from the impact. And yet she claimed she saw his face. Not just his car, his face. Shaq, watching the coverage from home, recognized the type. Delilah was the same woman he'd met 100 times in different forms. The kind who used politeness as a blade, who smiled at him in public, but clutched their purse a little tighter, who talked about inclusion at luncheons, but crossed the street when they saw him at dusk. She wasn't hysterical. She wasn't broken. She was composed. Too composed. Her grief came out in quotable soundbites, neatly packaged for television. She didn't weep until the cameras rolled. And when they did, her tears came with agenda. There was something else too. In every interview, every statement, she never spoke about the girl, her niece. She spoke about the damage, the embarrassment, the heartbreak this has brought our family. But there was no mention of recovery, no calls for healing, just a steady drumbeat toward blame. As the days passed, the public narrative hardened. People who had once waved at Shaq across parking lots now avoided eye contact. Parents pulled their kids closer when he walked by. His gym emptied out, his inbox filled with concerned citizens, demanding accountability. One even suggested he turn himself in before things got worse, though he hadn't been charged, and the investigation was ongoing. The media stopped asking questions and started shaping answers. A panel on a cable news show debated whether athletes were too coddled to face consequences. An op-ed questioned whether celebrity privilege had blinded the public to what's obvious, all rooted in assumption, none grounded in fact. Through it all, Delilah smiled gently and folded her hands just so. At a glance, she was mourning. Look deeper, and she was managing, curating, orchestrating. But a few people started to wonder, not loudly, but quietly, behind closed doors. Why was she so sure? Why had she inserted herself so forcefully into the story? And why did the footage from nearby businesses seem strangely absent? What was Delilah Moorcroft hiding behind those white linen layers? It didn't take long for the storm to gather teeth. By the end of the week, Shaq's name was trending across platforms not for what he'd done, but for what someone said he'd done. The echo chamber of outrage didn't wait for due process. It didn't pause for facts. It moved like fire in dry grass, fast, hungry, and indiscriminate. Social media, lit up with opinions cloaked as truth. I used to love Shaq, but this is unforgivable. Just another celeb thinking he's above the law. Look at the size of him. Of course it was him. The algorithms didn't care about nuance. They fed on conflict, and Delilah's accusations had become the perfect fuel. Clips of her interviews circulated with dramatic music laid underneath. Her voice, I saw him, repeated like gospel. Her linen dress became a symbol, her poised sorrow packaged and sold as virtue. Shaq didn't have a press team. He didn't post statements. He believed that truth didn't need theater. But in a world where perception outpaced reality, that silence became damning. To some it was strength, to others it was guilt. Then came the articles. At first, local, then regional, then national outlets picked it up. Each one twisted the same sentence a different way. O'Neal accused in local hit and run. Former NBA star tied to crash. Not a single charge had been filed, but the headlines didn't care. His face, once a symbol of towering warmth and presence, was now filtered in gray, cast beside footage of ambulances and caution tape. Sponsors reacted first. A national sports drink company quietly scrubbed his image from their homepage. A sneaker brand he'd collaborated with years ago issued a vague statement about ongoing situations and evaluating public partnership. His name, once a magnet for investment, had become a liability. The gym, his heart project, felt it next. Protesters began showing up at the front steps. Not mobs, but enough to make a statement. Handmade signs with crude accusations. Red tape shaped into the word liar across his billboard image. The same kids he used to mentor now avoided eye contact when he passed by. Some parents pulled their memberships without explanation. Others sent emails laced with concern, asking if he'd consider stepping away until things clear up. It wasn't just the business. It was the town itself. A place he'd poured into. A place he'd lifted. Shaq had sponsored scholarships, rebuilt playgrounds, funded after-school programs out of his own pocket. He never asked for his name on plaques or buildings. He did it because he believed in community, in showing up. But now that same community watched him burn from behind closed blinds. He tried to stay moving. Morning still began with that walk. Even if the greetings were colder now, he still bought his coffee from the gas station. Even as Mr. Reynolds fumbled through a forced smile and didn't meet his eyes, he still held the door for strangers who now hesitated before stepping past him. The shift wasn't loud. It was subtle. 1,000 tiny gestures turned colder. And then came the moment that split his heart open. Shaq had gone to the corner market, the same one where he'd once paid off a single mom's grocery bill, without saying a word. As he walked down the snack aisle, selecting cereal for the youth center donation bin, he heard a small voice behind him. "Mom, is that the man who hurt that little girl?" Shaq froze. The mother didn't answer. She just ushered the child away, quickly, like proximity might taint them. He stood there, hand hovering over a box of Frosted Flakes, stomach hollowed out by something heavier than shame. It wasn't that a child had asked. It was that somewhere, someone had told that child he had. Outside, he sat on the bench beneath the store's faded awning. He didn't cry, but he didn't move either. Just stared ahead, past cars, past trees, into something no one else could see, a space where all the good he'd done felt like ash. The flashbacks came uninvited. The night he spent sleeping in his truck during a storm because a young mother and her newborn needed his spare room more than he did. The time he helped a teenager with a speech impediment prepare for a school debate, staying up until midnight drilling flashcards and encouraging him not to give up. The way that same boy had cried after winning second place, saying no one had ever believed in him before. None of that mattered now. Not to the crowd. Not to the headlines. Not to the whispers painting him with a brush dipped in fear and assumption. His mother, Lucille, tried to call every day, but he hadn't answered. Not yet. He didn't know how to explain this weight. She'd taught him to fight with dignity, to carry the burden without letting it bend him. But this felt different. This wasn't just prejudice. This was betrayal, and it wasn't just coming from strangers. It was from neighbors. From the local pastor who once preached about justice but now avoided his calls. From the school board he donated laptops to, who now held emergency meetings about optics. From the very streets he walked daily, now watching him through a lens tainted by one woman's unwavering lie. And still, no charges, no arrests, just suspicion, shapeless and slippery, gripping his life like a fog that wouldn't lift. He walked home that night slower than usual. As he passed the mural painted last fall, his smiling face surrounded by kids' handprints, he noticed someone had spray painted over his eyes. Black streaks running down like tears. No name, no note, just defacement masquerading as justice. He didn't stop, didn't react, just kept walking, one heavy step at a time. Because when the world decides to crucify you, It rarely checks for nails. The noise outside kept growing. But inside, Shaq had gone quiet. He spent his days in the back of his house now. Not hiding, just still. The room stayed dim, curtains mostly drawn. He sat with the TV on mute, watching closed captions flicker across the screen like static confessions. Most of the time he didn't even know what was playing. He just needed something moving in the silence. Lucille noticed the shift the moment she stepped into the house. His fridge was full. His shoes were stacked at the door. His laundry neatly folded. That wasn't a man falling apart. That was a man holding everything in so tight, it could fracture without warning. She didn't say much that first day. Just cooked. Kept the radio low. Let the rhythm of her chopping and stirring offer what words couldn't. But by the third day, she'd had enough of stillness. She knew her son, how he internalized storms, and she also knew when something didn't sit right. "I keep thinking about what that woman said," Lucille muttered while drying dishes. The timing, the way she told it. She looked over her shoulder. Shaq didn't speak, but he listened. "She said she saw you from across the street. Said she saw your face. You remember that?" Lucille's voice was low, measured, like she was testing the ground before stepping forward. "Only thing is, I was on that corner 2 hours earlier that day. That whole stretch was in full sun. No way she saw anything through those tinted windows from that far unless she was standing right next to the car." Shaq didn't move, but his eyes shifted toward her, just enough to show she had his attention. "There's holes, baby," she continued, more certain now. Small ones. But holes still leak water. It was enough to rouse something inside him. Not anger. Not yet. But friction. That quiet internal spark that says, maybe there's more to this than what they're showing me. Shaq didn't trust hope anymore, but he trusted instincts, and his mother's were razor sharp. That same night he made a call he hadn't made in years. Reggie Vallon picked up on the third ring, voice groggy but amused. "Damn. I thought you fell off the planet, big man," Reggie said, chewing through a mouthful of cereal even though it was past midnight. Reggie was one of those friends who had never cared much for the public version of Shaq. They met long before fame, back when Shaq was just a lanky teenager with soft eyes and busted sneakers. Reggie had been the neighborhood tech wizard, fixing speakers, jailbreaking phones, setting up home cameras long before it was trendy. Now semi-retired and running a custom drone business out of his garage, Reggie still had one foot in the underground. The kind of guy who knew how to get street cam footage 2 states away if he had a license plate and a reason. Shaq gave him both. The next morning, Reggie showed up with a laptop, 3 hard drives, and a coffee that looked like it was made of motor oil. He set up at Shaq's kitchen table like it was a war room. "First we go wide," Reggie said, pulling up a grid of the area near the crash site. "These little convenience stores and restaurants, they've all got dash cams, or building cams. Not all of them work, but enough do." They sifted through angles, hours, timestamps. Shaq hovered close, silent but focused, while Reggie navigated frame by frame. The first few hours yielded nothing but cars, pedestrians, and shadows. Then, something. "Hold up," Reggie whispered, freezing a frame. A wide-angle shot from a liquor store, across from the crash zone, showed a vehicle rolling past. Not Shaq's Escalade, but another black SUV. Similar shape, similar color, but this one had a dent in the front bumper. The camera caught it just moments before the hit occurred, the timestamp placing it in the area 2 minutes before impact. "Zoom in," Shaq said, leaning closer. The image wasn't crystal clear, but it showed enough. A young figure in the driver's seat with long, straight blonde hair blowing slightly through the open window. Reggie leaned back. "That sure as hell ain't you." They kept digging. 3 cameras down. A dashcam parked across from a bar captured something else. Post-crash. A woman running. Long hair. Tall frame. She was sprinting behind the alley with something in her hands. It wasn't clear, but it was the direction that mattered. Away from the crash site. Not toward it. Not toward help. Shaq's jaw clenched. "That her?" Reggie asked, already knowing. He didn't say Delilah's name. He didn't have to. Lucille came into the room slowly, a hand over her chest. She watched the footage play twice, then a third time, each loop making her spine straighten. She wasn't a witness, she said softly. She was there, but she wasn't watching. She was hiding. The pieces started to move. Delilah hadn't seen the hit and run from across the street. She had been at the scene, possibly involved, certainly covering something. The woman in white linen, had been close enough to name a man with full confidence, not because she saw the truth, but because she needed a lie that would work. Shaq sat down at the edge of the table, every breath deeper than the last. A slow unraveling inside him began. Not rage, not yet, but clarity. Cold, deliberate clarity. They didn't know what the niece looked like. Not yet, but a name was public in the hospital reports. Marley Moorcroft, 17, enrolled at Westover High, reportedly traumatized and unable to speak. Reggie was already checking yearbook photos. Lucille picked up her phone and began calling contacts. Not media, not lawyers. People. Folks who still owed her favors, or respected her legacy enough to talk. She didn't plan to make noise. She planned to get truth in the right hands. The kind of truth that couldn't be deleted or misinterpreted. Shaq stood and stared out the kitchen window as dusk settled over the block. His house was still, but something inside it had awakened. Delilah had woven a story so tightly that the public never looked beneath it. But now, the thread was loose. And when it started to pull, there'd be more than just fabric unraveling. There'd be truth, jagged and undeniable. And once it started, it wouldn't stop. The moment Reggie saw the timestamp, he leaned forward in his seat, one hand pressed tight to his temple, the other frozen on the mouse. Shaq stood behind him, arms crossed, eyes narrowed at the grainy footage unfolding on Reggie's screen. It was late, deep past midnight, and the house was quiet enough to hear the laptop fan whine under pressure. "There she is," Reggie muttered, clicking to zoom. The bar's parking lot camera captured everything from a high corner angle, wide lens, slightly tilted, but sharp enough under the LED floodlight to make out faces, gestures and plates. At the edge of the frame was Delilah Moorcroft's sleek white BMW, pulling into a spot crookedly, nearly scraping the painted divider. The time read 4:12 p.m., 13 minutes before the child was hit. Shaq said nothing. He watched. The driver's side door opened, and Delilah stepped out, heels clacking against asphalt, her linen dress shifting in the breeze. She looked composed at first, until the passenger door flew open, and Marley Moorcroft stumbled out, nearly collapsing into the side of the car. The girl was clearly drunk, her movements loose, unfocused. She waved her arms erratically as she spoke, but there was no audio, only the raw physicality of the moment. Delilah grabbed her niece by the forearm, pulling her away from the front bumper. Marley swatted her hand off, then reached for the keys dangling from Delilah's fingers. A heated argument played out in silence. Marley yelled, pointed toward the road, toward the car. Delilah stepped back, shaking her head violently. The girl lunged again, and this time, Delilah reacted. Not violently, not cruelly, but decisively. Her arm swung, sharp and controlled, knocking the keys out of Marley's hand. They skidded across the pavement beneath the car. Then, a moment of stillness. Both women stood frozen, chests heaving. Delilah bent down, scooped the keys, and turned her back on the girl. She paced a few feet away, pulled out her phone. Marley followed. Saying something sharp, Delilah stopped, spun around, and pointed back toward the BMW with the kind of finality that needed no words. But Marley didn't listen. The girl walked off frame, and moments later, another vehicle, a black SUV, crept into the camera's corner from the opposite direction. Same model as Shaq's, but different rims, different front grille, and a noticeable dent on the passenger side bumper. The vehicle rolled past slow, cautious, and exited screen right. Shaq's breath was shallow now. His eyes didn't blink. 2 minutes later, in the same footage, Delilah looked up from her phone. Her shoulders straightened. She suddenly rushed back to the passenger side of her BMW, yanked the door open, and reached in for something. Purse maybe more. Then, after a beat, she stepped into frame again, alone, walking briskly away from the bar and toward the road. Shaq's Escalade was parked 2 blocks down in the opposite direction. "I think she saw it happen," Reggie said, his voice barely above a whisper. She knew what was coming. Or, she saw who actually did it. They cross-referenced the time. The camera clocked the incident at 4:25 p.m. Delilah had been on the scene before the crash, not just after. Her story, the one she fed the town, the media, the police, began to fold in on itself. She hadn't seen Shaq do anything. She'd seen someone else, and in the space of one decision, one desperate moment, she crafted a lie big enough to bury the truth, or try to. Shaq sat down slowly. Not in shock. In recognition. He understood what had happened now. Delilah's eyes that day weren't wide with panic. They were calculating. Her tears weren't grief. They were strategy. Marley must have taken the other SUV. Drunk, furious, reckless. And Delilah, standing yards away, either saw her niece hit that child or arrived seconds after and knew what had been done. Either way, the cover-up began instantly. It wasn't hard to guess the rest. She scanned the chaos, saw Shaq's black Escalade nearby, and seized the opportunity. A convenient silhouette, a known figure with a visible vehicle, and just enough community fatigue behind him. One word from her, "That's the car," and the town's own bias would do the rest. She didn't just lie, Reggie said. She directed a whole damn play. Lucille stood in the doorway, arms crossed. She wasn't surprised. She was resolved. "This ain't new," she said flatly. "Just a different dress. Same old dance. White woman cries. Black man pays." The question now was what to do with the truth. The footage wasn't enough to exonerate Shaq fully, not legally, but it shattered Delilah's credibility. It placed her at the scene before the crash, contradicting her statement. It showed a family secret unraveling in real time. A drunk teen, a panicked aunt, and a narrative stitched together to protect a last name. Reggie backed everything up onto 3 drives. One went to Lucille. One to Shaq. One would be held in reserve. "Timing matters," Lucille said. "If you put this out now, all it'll do is make people say you're attacking a grieving family. That girl's still in the hospital. Sympathy's still in Delilah's favor." Shaq nodded slowly. He wasn't rushing. This wasn't revenge. It was truth. But truth had to be delivered, not just dropped. It had to cut clean. "What if we leak it anonymously?" Reggie offered. "Push it out to a few indie reporters. Let the story turn on its own. Delilah won't see it coming." Shaq didn't answer right away. He looked back at the paused footage on the laptop, the frame where Delilah stood, with her niece, reaching for the keys she would later pretend never existed. He thought about the little girl still recovering in the hospital. About Marley, young, drunk, maybe even regretful, but not blameless. And he thought about all the kids in town watching this unfold, learning what the world does to a man like him, when someone with the right skin and story says a name with enough confidence. "This was never just about me," Shaq said. "This is about what people choose to believe, and why." He didn't need Delilah to go to jail. He didn't even need her to say sorry. But the truth, had to be louder than the lie. And it would be. The hardest part wasn't the silence. Shaq had lived with that before. It wasn't the lies or the stares, or even the sting of betrayal from a town he'd fed, protected, uplifted. The hardest part was the choice. The footage sat on the edge of a decision. Cold, objective, unforgiving. It showed what it showed. Delilah at the scene long before she claimed. Her niece, unstable and angry, reaching for keys she wasn't supposed to hold. The wrong SUV, the wrong driver, the real truth. But it wasn't admissible yet. Not formally. Reggie had pulled it through a backdoor method, which meant it would take time, process, and legal permission for it to land in court. Time Shaq didn't trust this town to give him. And in the middle of that waiting, the question burned. What would he do with the truth? Shaq sat alone in the gym's upstairs office, the one that overlooked the full court below. The lights were off. Dust drifted in golden beams across the polished hardwood. He watched as 2 kids shot hoops below, unaware of who was watching them from above. A third kid sat on the sideline, lacing up beat-up sneakers with one hand and balancing a boxed juice with the other. That used to be him. 15. Unseen. Hungry for a chance. He closed his eyes. Just like that, he was back there. 15 years old, riding home from a summer camp with a group of classmates. They'd stopped at a gas station. Something had gone missing. Wallet, cash, keys. Everyone turned to him first. The coach didn't ask questions. The cops showed up within minutes. He was handcuffed, searched, made to sit on hot asphalt, while white families walked by pretending not to see him. Later they found the wallet in another boy's backpack. A boy who cried and claimed he'd been trying to keep it safe. That boy got a warning. Shaq got a scar he never really talked about. Because what stayed wasn't the arrest. It was the look on everyone's face when they thought he'd done it. Like they expected it. Like it confirmed something they'd already believed. Now, he was older, bigger, louder in the world's eye. But not much had changed. Delilah had said his name, with conviction. Not because it was true, but because it would be believed. And it almost was. It still might be. The girl in the hospital was still in a coma. 6 years old. Her name was Avery. Her mother had posted a statement begging for peace, asking people to stop pointing fingers. But peace doesn't trend. Peace doesn't make headlines. And then there was Marley. Shaq had seen the photos. 17. Blonde. High GPA. Cheer squad. Future sorority legacy. Her name was being kept out of the press. But people in town whispered about her. She was devastated. Traumatized. Didn't remember a thing. Rumors said she hadn't spoken since the crash. Another said she was being treated for psychological shock. Delilah hadn't spoken again either. Not publicly. Her silence, unlike Shaq's, was interpreted as dignity. Now the truth sat in Shaq's hands like a loaded question. Do you clear your name, or protect their future? He thought of every kid who looked like him. The ones he mentored. The ones who saw themselves in his walk, his strength, his skin. What would staying silent teach them? That dignity meant swallowing injustice? That truth only mattered if it was palatable to power. But exposing Marley would destroy her record, her schooling, her standing. She'd become another viral story. Teen girl ruins life in reckless act. And as much as Shaq hated what had been done to him, he couldn't pretend the girl behind the wheel wasn't still a child herself. Lucille wasn't one for mincing words. She saw the war in his face and cut to the core. You think protecting her is kindness, she said, arms folded in the hallway. Because it ain't. Protecting a lie only teaches the next one how to grow. Shaq didn't answer. He was still watching the kids on the court. One of them dunked on the low rim, hollering with joy. The sound bounced all the way to the ceiling like sunlight after storm clouds. You speak up, and they'll paint you as a destroyer, Lucille said. You stay quiet, and you become part of the cover-up. There's no easy out here, baby. He turned slowly, his voice low. If it was your daughter, if you knew her whole life would change, Lucille didn't blink. If it was my daughter, I'd want her to face what she did. Because shame's heavy. But it don't kill you. Lies do. That night, Shaq drove to the edge of town. Not for peace, just distance. He parked his Escalade on the overlook that watched the whole valley stretch out beneath the fading sun. In the distance, houses blinked with porch lights. Streets glowed. Life moved on, even while his felt stuck in the same moral loop. He thought about going public, about facing the cameras, but he knew how they'd spin it. The black man shaming the sweet white girl. They'd twist it into cruelty. They always did, no matter how gently he spoke. So instead, he called someone else. Des Morrow, a local black journalist who ran an independent blog that didn't pander to power. She was known for uncovering school corruption and city contract fraud. She had no investors to please, no ad sponsors to babysit. Shaq sent her the footage. No captions, no voiceover, just facts. He told her the full story. Told her to do with it what felt right. No names unless you find them on your own. He said, I don't want to bury a girl. I just want truth to breathe. Des paused on the line. You sure about this? He nodded. Even though she couldn't see. I don't need revenge. I just need the lie to stop echoing louder than the truth. The weight didn't lift immediately. But it shifted, like a stone repositioned in the hand. Still heavy, but no longer crushing. Shaq drove back into town as the sky turned navy. His windows down. No disguise. No fear. He didn't know what would come next. Headlines. Backlash. Maybe both. But he knew this. He would no longer carry someone else's silence. And whatever storm came next, he'd stand in it. Not as a victim, not as a villain, but as a man who chose to rise. It dropped on a Thursday morning. Not with fanfare, not from a major network, but as a quiet ripple through the undercurrent of online truth seekers. A blog post on Des Morrow's site, titled, What the Camera Saw, a Different Story from the White Linen Witness. Below the title was embedded footage, raw, time-stamped, uncut. The post went live at 9:03 a.m. By 9:07 it had been reposted twice on niche justice forums. By 9:21, a prominent activist Twitter account shared it with one caption, This is why we don't rush to believe the witness. It took exactly 37 minutes to go viral. The footage was damning, but not in the way people expected. It didn't scream guilt. It whispered intention. It showed Delilah's BMW parked well before the crash. It showed Marley stumbling drunk in the parking lot. It showed Delilah's interaction, her taking the keys, her argument, her turning away. It showed a different SUV, a damaged one, creeping into view. And finally, it showed a woman, matching Delilah's build and hair, moving toward the scene, not away. And just as critical, a separate clip from another camera further down the block showed Shaq's Escalade parked untouched. Still, he never entered it, never left, never moved. Shaq wasn't the one who ran. The internet did what it always does. Tore it apart, stitched it back together, and reframed the narrative in real time. Threads exploded with analysis, pixelated breakdowns, overlay timelines. People with no connection to the case became overnight detectives, syncing public statements against footage, pointing out the contradictions with brutal clarity. Delilah Moorcroft's carefully crafted persona, the white linen, the controlled voice, the poised grief, began to collapse under the weight of scrutiny. Old interviews were clipped and posted with new captions. "I saw him do it," played beside a freeze frame, showing her niece stumbling toward the bar, not the car. Her silence grew suspicious. The press turned. First gently, then decisively. One outlet issued a soft editorial, "In pursuit of truth, not assumption." Another ran a more direct headline, "Delilah's story unravels as footage questions her account." A journalist who had once praised her courage posted an updated piece, "The Dangers of Eyewitness Heroism." Delilah didn't respond. She canceled her next scheduled interview, declined calls, closed the comments on her social media. But the silence was louder than any denial. Then came the institutional fallout. Marley's College, a prestigious East Coast university that had accepted her early, rescinded her admission by end of week. Their statement was polished and emotionless. "We hold all applicants to the highest standards of conduct. Based on new information, her enrollment is withdrawn." Behind the words was a clear message: "We believe what we saw." The Moorcroft family lawyer issued a brief, tense note. No comment at this time. But still, no apology. Not to Shaq, not to the girl in the hospital, not to the town. And that, more than anything, was what hurt. Shaq watched it unfold, not from a distance but from a strange middle ground. Not a vindicated hero, not a victim, either. Just a man who'd carried a weight the world had been eager to place on him. The footage was proof. But proof didn't bring peace. It brought questions no one was brave enough to answer out loud. Why was it so easy to believe the lie? Why had no one, not the reporters, not the police, not the protesters, stopped to ask, what if she was wrong? The gym reopened, slowly. A few members trickled back. Some apologized. Most didn't. Just nodded, mumbled something about glad it got cleared up. As if a smear could be wiped clean with a shrug. At the grocery store, an elderly woman patted Shaq's arm and said, "I knew you'd never." But he remembered seeing that same woman cross the street 3 weeks ago, when he walked past. Even Reggie, usually cool under pressure, seemed subdued. "You think she'll ever own up?" he asked. Shaq shook his head. "People like her don't confess. They vanish. They let time erase it for them." Delilah stopped showing up to city board meetings. Her name was quietly removed from 3 upcoming charity events. Her face disappeared from posters. But there was no press conference. No admission. Just a slow fade, like a whisper retreating into the background. The truth had come out, but justice hadn't. No arrest, no charge, no official statement correcting the narrative. The system that had raced to believe her now dragged its feet to correct itself. Because when a lie fits the world's expectations, it takes more than truth to undo it. Shaq didn't seek revenge. He didn't sue, didn't file a complaint. He said what he needed to say in a brief post. Truth is its own answer. "I forgive, but I do not forget." Some applauded. Others asked for more, demanded outrage, lawsuits, consequences. But that wasn't his language. He wasn't there to satisfy vengeance. He was there to stand in the gap, so the next black man with a kind heart and a quiet presence wouldn't have to. But still, the silence lingered. Not in him, in them. No apology from the officers who approached him with suspicion in their eyes. None from the neighbors who whispered behind their blinds. Not even from the child's parents. Not because they believed he was guilty, but because maybe they were still unsure. That was the cruelest twist. Even the exonerated remain under suspicion, when their skin carries history. Shaq walked the same streets now, but they felt different. Not hostile, just changed. Like everyone knew what happened but didn't know what to do with it. The mural near the gym had been cleaned, the black streaks removed, but he didn't look at it the same. It used to represent pride, now it represented survival. Because what the world never admits is this: truth doesn't always restore what lies break. Sometimes it just sits beside the rubble and waits for people to look it in the eye. And most don't. Delilah Moorcroft's resignation didn't come with a press conference. No cameras, no public address, just a single line in the city council's minutes. Effective immediately, Delilah Moorcroft has vacated her position on the board. A footnote in a meeting that went on discussing potholes and zoning permits, like her name hadn't once commanded rooms full of applause. No apology, no ownership, just retreat quietly, but not unnoticed. Her family released a brief statement through their lawyer. It said that the ordeal had taken a toll, that Marley was suffering from a disorienting trauma response, and that their focus was on rebuilding away from public scrutiny. The phrase mental health appeared twice, while the word truth appeared nowhere. They never addressed the footage. They never addressed Shaq. Instead, they folded inward, protecting their name with silence, the same way they once tried to protect it with a lie. Shaq didn't push back. He didn't hire lawyers, didn't file a civil suit or demand a public retraction. People expected him to, some even begged him to. He received emails, messages, even calls from activists offering to amplify the case, to take it to court, to make a statement that couldn't be ignored. But he declined, because he'd already made the only statement that mattered. Every Friday morning, since the truth came out, Shaq made a quiet drive across town to a weathered house with chipped blue paint and a small ramp at the front porch. No camera crew followed him. No posts were made. He carried 2 large paper bags filled with groceries, boxed lunches, and over-the-counter medicine, sometimes toys, sometimes books, sometimes nothing more than a small envelope, with a folded card that simply read, "Thinking of you." It was Avery's home. The girl who had been hit. Still recovering. Still fighting. Her family never asked for help, never posted a GoFundMe. But Shaq had found out through someone at the youth center that the father had lost work to stay home with her, and the mother was cycling through 3 part-time jobs. They didn't want pity, they just wanted peace. So Shaq gave what he could, not as a headline, but as a man trying to show up where it counted. He didn't stay long during those visits. Just enough to hand over the bags, exchange a few words. Sometimes they talked about sports. Sometimes they didn't talk at all. Once, as he turned to leave, Avery's mother had reached out and touched his arm. "I'm sorry," she whispered. Shaq nodded once, then walked away. The world, meanwhile, spun on with its usual commentary. Pundits debated his silence on cable shows. Some called it admirable restraint. Others framed it as a missed opportunity for justice. Think pieces poured in. The power of quiet integrity, when victims choose peace, black forgiveness, and the cost of grace. Everyone wanted to define what he'd done, to label it, box it, dissect it for meaning. But Shaq never offered them the satisfaction. He declined all interview requests, let his social media go dark. The only public appearance he made was at the local rec center, where he resumed coaching youth basketball every Saturday, just like before. He wore the same hoodie, gave the same hugs, shouted encouragement from the sidelines like nothing had changed, even though everything had. And slowly, the town began to shift again. Not dramatically, not like a curtain falling, but incrementally, the same way water changes the shape of stone. Slow, steady, unavoidable. People who once doubted him began to offer tentative smiles. Some waved from their porches again. Parents brought their kids back to the gym. A few even apologized quietly, haltingly. Didn't know the whole story, they said. Just wanted to say, "I'm glad you're still here." Shaq nodded. He always nodded. He never said, "I told you so." Never said, "You should have believed me," because that wasn't the point. The mural outside the gym had been retouched. This time someone added a line beneath it in clean, bold lettering. Integrity doesn't always roar. Sometimes it walks silently, where no one sees. No one admitted who'd painted it. Shaq didn't ask. He saw Delilah once more. By accident. In a downtown market, near the florist. She was wearing dark sunglasses, and moved like someone trying not to be seen. They locked eyes for a second. Just one. She didn't look angry. Or afraid. She looked ashamed. She turned away first. Shaq didn't follow. He didn't need to. He knew that her silence now wasn't strategy. It was consequence. And for once that was enough. The truth had not brought full justice. It had not rewritten headlines or healed wounds overnight. But it had echoed, through screens, through hearts, through hallways where people used to whisper, and now stood a little quieter before speaking. Shaq walked home that day, beneath a low golden sun. He passed a teenager on a bike, who gave him a fist bump. Passed an old man on a stoop who said, "You're a better man than I'd be." He smiled, said nothing, kept walking. Because some fights weren't about proving who was right. Some were about showing what right looked like. There was no big moment, no award, no town hall. What happened instead was quieter and more permanent. It started with the kid from the convenience store. The same one who once whispered, "Did you hurt that little girl?" Now he waited outside the gym on Tuesdays with his little brother, asking Shaq if he could help stack the water bottles before practice. Then came the local teacher, the one who had posted an article condemning Shaq early on. She didn't apologize out loud, but she left a note in the rec center's donation jar, "For what you've done, and for what we didn't see soon enough." At the library, a display went up during Black History Month. Instead of a typical poster of Dr. King or Rosa Parks, there was a wall titled "Dignity Under Fire." At the center was a photo of Shaq, not in uniform, not on the court, but sitting beside a child in a wheelchair, handing her a book. No caption, just the image. It didn't erase what had happened, but it reframed it. In the minds of those willing to look closer, it became clear, this man wasn't just innocent. He was exemplary, not for enduring false blame, but for refusing to let it turn him bitter. The deeper truth was harder to say out loud, that this wasn't just about Delilah, or Marley, or even Avery. It was about a system that dehumanizes black men before asking who they are, a world that sees size as threat, quiet as guilt, presence as danger. Shaq had faced that system. And instead of burning it down, he'd let it expose itself, brick by brick. And yet it's worth noting what didn't happen. There was no formal apology from law enforcement. No press outlet ran a feature titled "We Got It Wrong." Delilah never resurfaced. Her name faded from council rolls. Her charities replaced with new donors. Marley was quietly enrolled in an out-of-state program, under a different scholarship. The story became a ghost, the kind people remember only when it's convenient, and forget when it becomes uncomfortable. But Shaq remembered, not out of spite, but because forgetting would mean surrendering everything the experience had taught him, and he wasn't built to forget. Instead, he poured that memory into something lasting. At the edge of town, on the side of the old post office building, a mural began to take shape. It started with a few sketches, done by a local artist who had once painted protest signs in alleyways. Then came the outlines, bold, purposeful. People passed by and watched it take form. Some curious, some unsure, but no one dared question it. When it was finished, it spanned nearly the entire wall. It showed Shaq, not towering, not dominant, but present. One hand on his heart, eyes steady. His expression wasn't angry. It wasn't proud. It was honest. The face of a man who had held a lie in his hands and refused to let it define him. Beside him, in swirling letters painted in midnight blue, were the words, "The truth ain't always loud." But at last, people stopped. Some took photos. Some didn't. A few stared longer than they meant to, then walked away changed, even if they couldn't explain how. No news station came to cover the mural's unveiling. No ribbon was cut. But that was fine. Shaq didn't want a headline. He wanted a marker, something to stand long after memories faded. Something that would remind the next generation not to speak until they'd seen, and not to see until they'd listened. A week after the mural was finished, a child walked by holding her mother's hand. The girl paused, tugged on her sleeve. "Mom," she asked, "is that the man who helps people?" Her mother nodded. "That's him." The girl looked up at the painting again, then back at the street. And when she saw Shaq walking toward them, just a man in a hoodie, no cameras, no crowd, she waved. Not because she was told to, but because she believed it. And in that one small gesture, years of suspicion, judgment, and silence felt a little lighter. Because sometimes justice doesn't wear a robe. Sometimes it wears sneakers, walks quiet, and leaves behind a wall of color in a town that almost let a lie win. And the story the world won't tell, Shaq lived it, and made sure it would never be forgotten. If this story stirred something in you, don't let it stop at the screen. Start the conversation they're too afraid to have. Look closer. Ask louder. Stand taller. Because the next time truth is whispered, someone like you needs to hear it. And someone like Shaq needs to know he's not standing alone.